Okay, it's 6 o'clock. Hello, everybody. Shall we get going? Yeah? Okay. Um, Welcome, everybody, to this dialogue on exploring the Dharmic mind. Before we start off, we'd like to say a big thanks to all of you for being here, and a big thanks to also our friends at the Truth and Reconciliation Work movement for organizing this TRW week, which is an annual event and offering this space for meaningful conversations and explorations. So, a big thanks to the TRW team as well, and to all of you for being here. Before we start off, I'd also like to request. Hari might have put in this chat. Hari, if you haven't done that, could we put in the chat for the or the link for the other events at TRW? This week. And all these events are being offered in the spirit of gift economy, and uh, especially with a request to contribute to COVID relief around the world. So the friends at TRW have uh, selected some reliable and wonderful efforts working on COVID relief. So you're welcome to look up the list that's come up in the chat window. There's a link that will take you to the whole schedule of events and also some COVID relief efforts around the world that you can contribute to. Yeah, so thanks again, and I'll request Raghu to set the context for the evening, and then we'll take it from there. Over to you, Raghu.
Thank you, Naveen. Yeah, so we're back at the Truth and Reconciliation Dialogue. Yeah, we did a Truth and Reconciliation Dialogue last year, and it took us into a very, very interesting space. So Sukhi, myself, Naveen, and a few other friends who were there at that time, Preeti, and others, ended up having a year-long dialogue between us over several issues that got triggered in the process. So we don't know what this TRW dialogue is going to do to us. And we're very happy if it triggers an in-depth dialogue, because I think these are absolutely important and necessary in today's times. We've been having some chats about this question of dharma and what is not dharma, also because I'm kind of a little obsessed with the Mahabharata. Um, so let me start with by saying how we're approaching this question. Yeah, there's a very interesting statement, which is from the Dhammapada, I think, right, where the Buddha talks about the fact that human beings experience hurt, pain, and dukkha. And whenever people experience hurt and pain, they go seeking refuges. Then he goes on to say that people seek refuges in four things. They seek refuge in other people, they seek refuge in material possessions, they seek refuge in knowledge, and they seek refuge in the idea of God. Then he says the first two are easy to see through. The falsity of the first two refuges are relatively easy to see through. But the falsity of the second two, which is knowledge and the idea of God, are much more difficult to see through because they are of the nature of belief. And great violence happens before a person realizes that these are false refuges. And then he goes on to say that only when a person stops looking for these refuges and starts dealing with sorrow directly, does he take the first step to end sorrow? This has been a very, very powerful statement for me through which to look at several events, particularly how I engage with things, what I do with my hurts, and what I do with my fears, and so on. So, one of the things that comes up when you look at the current uh, Yuga Dharma, as it is called, one has to look at it, and if you look at it carefully, you actually understand that it's not Yuga Dharma but Yuga Adharma. So there's a very simple statement about dharma which comes in the Mahabharata. It simply says that any action that I do which enlivens me, enlivens my immediate context, and enlivens the world simultaneously is dharma. So this comes up in different ways in the Mahabharata over and over again. So if you look at what is happening in the world today, there seem to be two very powerful paradigms or thought memes or whatever you'd like to call it. Yes, central ideas of what it means to be human, what it means to be successful, and so on. On the one hand, you have an idea of what is real, which is positivist, reductionist, and bad science, where only what is measurable is accepted as true, without the humility of a scientist who starts with by saying, I don't know. And in order to discover, I'm using some of these tools. I don't think real scientists are reductionist, but there are very few around. So largely, we are using bad science, converting it into technology. And this technology, the way it is used, is adharmic. Yeah. For example, billions of dollars are put into a study of what will make a person addicted to food. How much of sugar, how much of salt, how much of fat will get a person addicted to food. This is bad science. It's bad use of science. This is adharma. Okay? And one can give hundreds of examples like this. And then on the other hand, you have this whole idea of monolithic thought, monotheistic thought, where there is some truth that is put up in some book and a whole set of beliefs are used and isms are created around this. So it could be a religious ism, it could be nationalism, whatever it is. So these are forms of thought which are fundamentally hierarchical. Everybody in that system is a proxy of some unverified truth. And the promise of this truth is you sacrifice yourself to me, and I'm going to promise something to you in the other world. Right? And this form of thought has another characteristic. It says, if you come to me and if you obey me, I'm going to be nice to you. If you're not, I'm going to promise that you'll go to hell after you die. But before you die, I'm going to kill you if you don't really listen to me. Okay, so if you're an Indian and you really buy into nationalism, you will have to look at every Pakistani as somebody who will go to hell for sure. And you'll have to fight them and be antagonistic to them and so on. So these two forms of thought have got a stranglehold on human minds today. And if you put these two together, you get the worst form of imperialism, which is the colonizing mind. And the colonizing mind has devastated the earth. Right? Every problem that you have today, which is a global problem, is a consequence of a coming together of these two minds. So I think it's time, if we need to look at a possible future for humankind, I think we have to get up and call out how pernicious these two forms of thought are. and how all the isms and all the technologies that come out of this are ultimately destructive. Yeah. And my own speculation is there have always been a small group of people, whether it's scientists or technologists or people who belong to so-called religious groups, who've understood what is dharma, therefore do not subscribe to these forms of thought. But it's always been a very difficult fight. Yeah, for example, the first time I came across this whole issue of environmental possibilities of environmental destruction and so on was in the Club of Rome report in 1970. Right? Most of the stuff that was written there, time-wise, they might have gone a little bit here and there, but they've all been happening more or less as that document predicted. And yet, from the 70s, no government has taken it seriously. Commercial organizations don't take it seriously. And you have the possibility of climate disaster in another 15, 20 years. So we really have come to a point where we have to question these things head on, examine them, and call out that which is destructive and not dharmic. Yeah, so that's the hope that this forum can at least start doing.
Thanks, Raghu. We'll, of course, now build on this further. And I'll invite Sukhi to make some of her opening comments as well. And before you come in, Sukhi, just a reminder to everybody that there will be space for, this conversation will go on between the four of us for about an hour or nearly an hour. And then the last half an hour or so, we will have space for interacting with the audience as well. So in the meanwhile, if you have any questions, queries, comments, anything you want to say, please put it down in the chat. We'll pick it up in the last half an hour, and then we'll have a more interactive space towards the last 1/3 of the process. So over to you, Suki. Thanks, Raghu.
Thank you. So thank you, Raghu, for what you shared and setting a context. So what does being a dharmic person mean? This is a quest I consciously went on some years ago. And I think I'd like to bring in the context of the feminine here in my own journey of finding this dharmic being. So as far as I remember in my personal journey, from my earliest memory that I have felt less, I have felt inadequate, I have felt not belonging, kind of a thing. And lately I have wondered a lot about why is it that, how come that I felt like that? Was there a self that was present before this kind of a wounded being come forth? Who was I before I was this kind of a person? And this has led me into a lot of interesting journeys. And I also wish that when I was growing up or when I was small, somebody had told me that you are Amritasya Putram and not a child of sin or not inadequate. I wish somebody had told me that you're an immortal being, you're a beautiful child of the divine. You already belong. So the flowering that could have happened. So in my own journey with decolonizing myself, I have come first into a lot of anger at the life that I was denied, the rich life that I was denied, and then into a lot of grief, into the life I could have had. And finally into a place of acceptance. So it's been an interesting journey for me. And it's been a journey of retrieval, picking up pieces of me and putting them back inside. And so it's been very rewarding. And the truth is that before I consciously began on a journey of decolonizing myself, I had no clue the extent to which I had a colonized mind. I mean, it shocked me when I started. I mean, the threads of it went everywhere. My education system completely put me in that track of thinking in a particular way. Um, like the monoculture, something that Raghu touched upon. That there is one way of being, and you have to fit into it. It in in our lives, there's a line drawn, and you have to be on one side of it only. If you transgress and you try to cross the line and go to the other side, then there are consequences. So um, in my journey with the feminine, reclaiming her, she too was totally missing in my life. I have been on a journey that's bringing more and more ease in my body and in my mind. And I'm realizing that this whole spiritual bypass thing that had been happening, and that's happening for a lot of us. What is it that we are bypassing? When we say spiritual bypass, what is it that we bypass? So the person who invented the term, according to him, it means the spiritual bypass is about bypassing pain. We don't want to go there. So all our efforts, all our journeys, our personal transformation journeys that we do, and otherwise as well, the life that we live is about not entering into our pain, avoiding it at any cost. And because of that, this is where we end up today. This is the kind of world we create today. Because pain means experiencing, the ability to experience. And somewhere we have been in a continuous process of numbing ourselves. And when we numb ourselves, we also dumb ourselves. So we are actually dumbed down tremendously. And my dumbing down happened when my longings were kidnapped. My aspirations were taken away from me. They happened so early on. And instead, I was given a rule book and said, we already have your life decided for you. This is how you do it. This is, you go to the school, and then you study these books, and then you do this, and then you do that. And this is the person you get married to. This is the job opportunities available to you. This is the education, etc., etc. All that happened. So so dharmic, my life was not a dharmic. It was the life. It was a not a dharmic mind. It was a drama mind, not the dharma mind. Filled with anxiety, filled with tormented. It was a tormented being. the journey of the feminine took me into an understanding of power at a very deep level. I had internalized so much of the white man's philosophy and thought and models. So every time I needed to learn something, I would turn to the thought of a white man or the book of a white man. And then when I realized that, it was really horrifying for me that there was very little of the indigenous left in me. So that whole journey of finding her, which is my true nature, Prakriti, which is my true Prakriti, led me into a very deep quest of what is power, which we call Shakti. And to understand that it is not something that is outside of me, but inside of me. And how I had given it away to everything and everyone. And the people to who, or the institutions, or the ideas, or the ideals, or the philosophy to which I had given away my power, had taken it from me, and I had given it away innocently, thinking that they will hold it well and use it for my good. But on the contrary, I found that it was being used to beat me up. So there came the difficult time to take it back. And the process of the dharmic mind for me is to be more and more wearing my skin with ease, being more peaceful inside of myself, being a restful person. And I'm happy to say that this journey is going well for me, and I'm really coming to that place now. Yeah, so maybe I can talk more about this later, but essentially it is about bringing the understanding of my indigenous nature, who I truly am, where I belong, and the richness to which I belong. That power is inherent in me. I am Shakti myself. And reclaiming my aspirations, my longings back, becoming the author of my own life. As this is the quest that has led me more and more into claiming my dharmic mind. And the fun part is when you do it along with others on the similar journey, then it's very rich and it's very beautiful. So let me stop here now, and maybe we can pick up the threads later.
Thanks, Sukhi. Yeah, I'd like to also bring Suruchi into this conversation. Suruchi, what's your journey been like? What questions are you currently holding, and how did you get here? And where did you get here from? Thank you.
Thanks, Naveen. Thank you. Thank you, Raghu and Sukhi. You know, I can just listen to you guys forever. Sometimes I'm like, what am I doing on this panel? I just want Raghu and Sukhi to keep talking. And that for me is just so fabulous, you know. So while they were speaking, I was wondering, what am I going to say? Because, you know, they said so much of what I wanted to share. So what I thought I'd do then is just share some personal examples, you know, where I'm coming from. I was brought up as a typical Mumbaikar, went to a convent school, was very westernized. I'd never worn Indian clothes. My parents didn't speak my mother tongue to us. I don't know any other language other than English, and really bad Hindi. And it's so heartbreaking. I just sit and weep sometimes at this loss, you know. But they were doing what they felt was best, and like the great middle class Indian dream, we migrated to the US. And I was there for my college. And then something started going wrong with me. Like I couldn't breathe after a couple of years. I was finding it harder and harder to breathe, And even though I had not been Indian at all when I was in India, I had these strange yearnings. I wanted to wear like Mallipu, like white jasmine flowers in my hair. I needed that smell. I just wanted to wear a bindi. I needed to wear Indian clothes. And I was like this little Indian girl in Chicago in freezing cold, like roaming around in my salwar kameez. And I must have been a sight, And then when I finished college, finally, I had the big conversation with my parents. I said, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I have to go back. And I was all of 18, 19, 20, 22 years old. And I didn't know anyone in India because my whole family had migrated, the great Punjabi dream where everybody migrates to the US and Canada, and we had done it. Anyway, I came back and there was so much hatred for India when I came back. It was sickening. I just couldn't bear it. The dirt, the filth, the systems, everything. And then from there, slowly unraveling that, exploring that. Why is the state affairs that way? What is it? How can I be an Indian? What does it mean to be Indian for me? And to discover all that, so that's been my journey. And, I'm an atheist, but when I see a temple or I see a beautiful statue or a tree, I bow or I go into the temple and I pray. And I feel Indians just understand that. They don't blink an eye. I can be an atheist and I can go to that temple and pray, and Indians can hold that duality. We get it because, I don't know, we just get it. To me, that is being Indian, I can look at what's happening around me. I can see how people with no Indian background or people who are they or them can take our goddesses, can take our yoga, can take our systems of philosophy, can take this amazing polytheistic religion and just make it into one religion, Hindutva, whatever's happening. And I can look at all of it and I can just smile gently or shrug or be sad because it's the great karmic wheel, Because for me, I think being Indian or dharmic, I'm still discovering that word, thanks to Raghu, because I'm doing his amazing courses, which I recommend very highly to everyone, Ritambara's courses, is to just look at the world with grace and with flow, We look at the world and we say, okay, it's okay. That's their way. It's happening. This is happening. And you have to be well-mannered about it. Good manners to me, that is deeply Indian. Just a gentleness. And now that I have a daughter, she's 14 years old, and it's really important to me that I pass on these lessons to her. What is dharma? What are these beautiful concepts that were part of the Indian way of being? Raghu, I'm doing this course with him, which is called the Saptaswara, where we examine certain words like Maitri, Gyan, Ramya. They're so beautiful, and those are, that is what I was seeking and maybe even living out as an ancient Indian, And then, of course, there is my whole journey with the divine feminine, but I won't speak about that right now. Maggie's mic is on. So, yeah, I'm going to leave it there. And maybe I'll come back to it with it. But over to you, Naveen.
Okay, thank you, Suruchi. Listening to all of you, especially when Raghu said he first encountered uh, critique of what's happening, in 1970, right, 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, it saddens me quite a bit. Yeah, because even in my own little effort at discovering a more healthy or a responsible way of living, it's been a struggle and attempt for about 20 years now. And of late, some of us have been studying, Gandhiji's Hind Swaraj and also Tagore's writings on nationalism, other things. It feels like a certain um, critique, not criticism, but a deeply grounded critique of this form of colonization, of these two thought memes that I think were highlighted. One of the monotheistic mind, and then the reductive rationalism. There have been very powerful voices from this soil that have been pointing out to us for decades. I mean, like Hind Swaraj was written 100 years, more than 100 years ago. Even from before that, right? There have been very powerful warnings, critiques, and also inspiring direction shown for a long time on the dangers of this way of life and how we could perhaps navigate this. And yet it looks like we're sinking. These voices have largely gone unheeded. It feels more and more. And we seem to be sinking in further and further into this sort of destructive way of life. So it really saddens me. And it's all the more very present for me because a couple of days ago I was watching this film, very powerful film called Where the Green Ants Dream. Yeah, it came out in 1984 by Werner Herzog, where it's actually a story where a geologist from modern civilization and the uranium company that he works for comes into a head-on collision with the Aborigines living in Australia, and they are blasting underground searching for uranium. And the Aborigines are actually sitting there and saying, don't do it. This is a sacred land. And why is it sacred? Because this is where the green ants dream. And these guys don't get it. They're like, what the hell are you talking? Green ants dreaming? Are you nuts? So it's these two worldviews that collide. And it's a beautifully made film. And towards the end, it suddenly hit me that, wait a minute, I am actually part of this fog and smoke. My way of thinking, my way of being is of that which just doesn't get the logic, or maybe it's more than logic. I struggle with words here, of what the Aborigines are talking about. Obviously, it means a lot to them, and they're actually staking their life, actually sitting through blasts, but it just hit me that I'm part of this way of life. And every day I'll continue with my way of life. More extermination of them as people and as their way of life happens. So it left me in a very helpless place, a very sad place. And I actually feel quite saddened and very, what does it mean for us to move on is what I'm thinking. Why is this resistance over 100 years, 80 years, 50 years? Club of Rome came out 50 years ago, and even today now, with every year, we're seeing the effects of climate change. We're seeing the effects of inequality, of division, and of war. More than anything, war, right? And yet, it seems so hard to decolonize, to decondition, and find a way of life which is in harmony. So at least I'm not looking at it as discrete, this or that, but yeah, I feel so far away from listening to the green ants, or even being open to the possibility that they can dream, and so can I. And that their dream is as important as mine. So that's where I am, and I'm just saddened, but I'd like to leave it at that and bring it back to you all, the three of you, and what further then for you? What questions? What directions?
What you're
What
saying
emerges
has
for you?
been
Yeah.
really to my heart. This whole thing about, this individualism, the rugged individualism, which was the heroic, rugged individual, the Marlboro man kind of a thing that was deified for a long time. Um, there were a lot of experiments done between Asian minds and Western minds, and it was found that the Asian mind is always contextual. It does not think outside. There is always a context. It's not in isolation. If you see an Indian, will always say, if you ask something, he'll say, it depends. It's a very favorite kind of thing, which maddens the Western mind. Which is, what do you mean it depends? That it has to be this or that. But we take everything according to the Sthan Kal Patra, where we are, who we are with, what time of period are we in. And according to that, things will move. So there's no fixity. So there was this experiment done, and the college students, and they were asked to take selfies, pictures of each other. And in the West, all the students, they took pictures of their friends. It was, the focus was on the face. And the Asians, when they took with the background. So the person is, not just the face, it's the background with the bench, the tree, the garden, everything is there. So automatically, the context is also important. So like what you're also saying, Naveen, that for, for us, it's the void is not just an empty space. It's not a vacuum. It's all the stars and the planets are stuck together in a relationship. Everything is in a relationship. And this is the unique offering of our culture, that any indigenous culture, that the flapping of a butterfly's wings in one part of the continent can create a storm in another part of the world is a truth that we knew. But you ask me, how much of this interconnected web am I connected with right now? So there, your sadness is also my sadness, that the web is broken. We need to weave it back together. And it has to be done in a community. We have to create these beautiful villages where minds come together, hearts come together, and we do this together. And maybe this kind of an attempt of our gathering like this is one such attempt.
Okay, so may I then just also add this question: what is a dharmic mind then? Because it looks like pretty much most of us are struggling to stay afloat in this sea of modernity, so to speak, across the world. And there is this thirst for this dharmic mind and a wholesome way of life. So what is it then, and how do we start deepening ourselves in it? Is a question then I'd like to bring it back to all of you.
But for me, I can say that it is becoming more and more embodied consciousness. I'm a nerd that way. I've read up a lot of stuff. I know a lot of things. I can hold a discourse on this, that, and the other. Today I was telling Suruchi about how many types of Naikas are there, and if the Naika goes on a Visarika, Naika goes to meet her lover in the night. She's called this, she's called that. All those, you know. But how much of what I know can I embody and I live? My lifestyle is, I think it can begin and end with that. What kind of a daily living am I doing? So it's a very anchored, grounded existence. That for me is the dharmic mind. One who is at ease with herself, and she also puts others at ease. So it's like your own system is regulated, and you can co-regulate other people's nervous systems as well. So
Okay, interesting. Thank
yeah.
you, Sukhi. Yeah, thank you. Would Raghu and Suruchi also have some things to add to this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, there's so many things to add that I'm sitting back and listening to Suki and everybody. Yeah, see, at one level, this dharmic life is not a difficult question. I think in your heart, you know, right? If you keep your heart open, you know what you're doing, right? You know when whatever you do is healthy for everybody. I don't think there's too much of question about that. The questions we need to ask is, why do we not respect this voice? Yeah, and I think there are lots of reasons why. Nah? See, one of the things is what Shoruchi was talking about, right? If shame is induced into you for who you are, it's a very difficult reality. I mean, if I can't own up myself in pride, whoever I am, and then look at the world from there, it's extremely difficult to act. And the chances of you getting drawn into, you know, different ways of dealing with this yearning and all that is very high, right? Now, the biggest energy that drives monolithic thinking is fear. They feed on fear, right? They promise you heaven, they promise you this, they promise you that. It's fed on fear. The other system feeds on greed, right? So one of the things is for us to find an ability to say no to these two, right? And this is where Buddha's statement comes up. No? If I'm in hurt and pain, can I also have the ability to say no to false promises, false ways of getting me out? Right? This is very critical. Okay. And for me, it first of all, you know, I think when you wake up to the fact that you've been fed a lot of lies about what it means to be successful, yeah, the theory of mind, the theory of the world is very, very biased, and it is not an honest statement, right? This is a shocking discovery because your parents are believing in this, the whole world is believing in this, right? And the idea that success can be defined completely differently from the way it's being defined in the world, I think is a very critical initial realization. Yeah. The other thing people have to realize is the expertise with which the oppressive civilizations have used propaganda. Right? So there was a very old film, I forget the name of the film, and it's coming back again in some forms. That there's a John Pilger film that somebody sent to me recently that talks about it. Yeah, the fact is that in this old film, they actually showed two things simultaneously, side by side, with very little commentary. They show America bombing the Bikini Atoll and Marurua Islands, and the entire thinking that went behind this, where It was clearly known that this bomb is going to affect people. And because these islands, the Marshall Islands, are in the middle of the Pacific, it was also known that the effects wouldn't go very far away from there. So you could study like guinea pigs, this few lakh people and what was happening to them, right? And at the same time, you see the President of America, you see other people talking about, how beneficial we are, how nice we are, and all this pretty face being put up, right? And the whole history of the bikini atoll, the fact that the word bikini became a fashion model thing at that time was one of these propaganda things to take you away. So if somebody said bikini, your associations will be with a pretty woman with a two-piece swimsuit. Yeah, all the stuff Sukil will go to town with this stuff, the way they've used these kind of stuff, right? At that time, they were sending people back to these islands which were highly contaminated to study what would happen to these people. And there were a group of scientists who befriended these Marshall Island people, talked to them in very sweet words, offered them, ice creams and things like that, and wrote to them nice letters while all the time studying how the cancers grew in them and so on. This to me is a parable of the coming together of the monolithic mind and the bad science mind. Most people don't know. And when you read these things, when you read about what happened to the native people in America, in Turtle Island, as they called it, you read what is happening to the Maoris, you read what's happened to the um, Aborigines in Australia, and then you look back to what happened in India, then you realize how much your minds have been colonized and how the elite have bought into a false narrative and how they push it. Because now it becomes their vested interest to push this. Yeah. And, lots of things that have happened in India are not as terrible as what has happened, let's say, in Australia or in Canada, where children have been forcibly taken away from their parents, put into schools and taught to hate their culture, to hate their parents and all of that, and how they have tried to recover. What's happened in India doesn't look that bad. No, nobody was taken away from their parents. But the whitewashing of the mind happened just as deeply, and the whitewashing that has happened after independence is just as culpable. So this kind of an understanding of what has happened, I think, is very critical, right? And it is critical not from some theoretical, oh, we are great in India kind of a thing, but because an honest polytheistic way of thinking, an honest scientific way of thinking is absolutely essential today. Without that, we are doomed. Okay, so Sheldrake, who wrote this thing, this Club of Rome report, he talked about some very simple ideas of how to live, which are all dharmic ideas. Yeah, and it's worth repeating it here. He says the first thing he says is voluntary simplicity. Yeah, so if you go into voluntary simplicity, GDP of nations will go down the drain. So no advertiser will allow for voluntary simplicity. Can you imagine? Right? The second is idea he talks about is cybernetic working through. So you have to start with I don't know and I will find out. Nobody who pushes bad science and nobody who pushes a monotheistic idea is ever going to say I don't know. Yeah. The third thing he talks about is something called existential responsibility. So if something is happening in Israel and Palestine, I'm responsible. So the way I think, the way I create an us and them is something that impacts all of global minds, right? Then he talks about the ecological ethic. Can you make a choice every time you do something to understand how this is impacting ecology? And finally, he talks about ecstatic human potential. Yeah, these are very beautiful set of statements. And this came out at the same time as this report came, saying, if you follow these 5 principles, you can beat these kinds of global issues that are coming up, right? And about the same time, a few years after this, there was a big study in Harvard about science of obsolescence. How do you design things so that they become obsolescent obsolete because you cannot make money if somebody is using something for a long time. Okay, in Japan, there were studies called robust design. Okay, of how to design things so that this loss to society is minimum. Yeah, just look at all of this. Now, so there's enough knowledge, enough understanding of how to live, which is dharmic. But the choices being made are very different. Okay, and if you have to look at it carefully, these are not just ideas, they impact the body. So one has to free the body from these kind of impacts. Okay, the feeling of shame because you're dark is a colonizer's idea of what is beautiful. Yeah, I don't know what Draupadi would have done. She was very dark. I don't know whether she'd be wearing whitening cream or whatever. I don't know. Right? Most of her great beauties were all dark. Right? So see what happens at the bodily level, na? And then your idea of what is the world, your idea of what is great and what is not great. Right? And I don't think anybody, I lost a very good friend. She's a good yoga student of mine. She'd come to class and she'd say how great India is. And then one day, how ancient this is. So I asked her one day, don't you think America has also got an ancient civilization? She looked at me very quizzical. And then when I talked about the Native Americans of Turtle Island, she never came for a class again. Yeah, so what do you do with the final solution of US?
Yeah.
Right, so who talks about it and who owns it up? Right, it's not enough for some guy to say, I'm sorry to the natives. If you're really sorry, you stop this whole process, you stop this mind.
Yeah, thanks, Raghu. Quick question, please correct me if I'm wrong. The 5 principles you listed out seem to be the essence of yoga to me.
Of course.
Yeah, given out in a different aphoristic sort of form. But this is the heart of yoga as I understand it, right?
Of course. I can tell you Sanskrit words for it, but that's not important now.
Sure.
Yeah, for me, I was just going to say that to answer, I won't be able to answer it in a very meta way, what is a dharmic mind? So I think for me, it's just the daily way of living in beauty, just living in beauty, and by beauty, I don't mean what we would generally think of as beauty, but in a much deeper and more whole way, how do I do that? And I feel when I do that, it's so embodied, because I'm an artist, I'm a performing artist. I anyway feel things very viscerally, so that's going on all the time anyway. In fact, I have to go more into the mind. I have to read to discover, because all these texts, Ayurveda, all this, when I was growing up, it was just considered baloney. It was, now it's coming back and it's just so wonderful and it's all so much more available to us. And I think the other thing for me, which I would consider dharmic, now that we have to we're putting this lovely word to it, is with my child or with the young women that I work with, and even men, because when I conduct my workshops, because I feel our children or the youth around us are kind of, once we've grown up, they are our last chance to change ourselves, because I can tell my daughter to do things, but she'll only be them and become them when I'm them. So that's my chance to change myself, you know. And I think I really tried to do that. Once I had her, I had to take a lot of very difficult decisions in my life, you know, but I did them. I did them. And I hope when she grows up to be a woman, she'll see that, you know, in some way. So to me, that would also be dharmic. You know, after I was doing the course, I realized how dharmic I was, because I chose my profession like when I was 5 years old, and I just stuck to it and I just followed it like Yudhishthir would, like just very like, this is what who I am and this is what I will do, you know. So that in a way also could be dharmic, but I don't know whether that's the kind of dharmic we're talking about here. So yeah, I just thought I'd add that.
Okay, thank you, Suruchi. Hey, this is strange. Suddenly, a lot of panels are appearing. Okay, whoever is pulling the strings.
We've been pinned.
Oh,
Ah.
okay. To me, it also appears, you know, I think it's already been said, but I'm just restating it for myself. I feel there is a responsibility to see, to me, the dharmic mind would be to take up the responsibility to see how these two minds are playing out in me and own up, like, you know, in what ways am I propagating this colonization? Because the convergence, you know, that deadly convergence of these two mindsets are in a whole lot of us, the civilized and the modernized, you know, and it's actually playing out in our hearts, in our minds, in our choices, in where my electricity comes from, my food comes from, where my waste goes. That's a real problem, you know. Like I have a whole big sack of plastic that I don't know where to put, because this is not recyclable plastic. These are these wrappings. I can't dump it anywhere, so it's piling up in a corner of my kitchen, and very soon I won't have space. But I don't know what to do, you know. But my consumption uh, has changed a little bit, has not changed a lot. So in many ways, this is playing out in my life, in our lives, and to me it feels like existential responsibility, as you defined it, Raghu, as you mentioned it, seems to be about, can I take ownership for how am I propagating these thought memes in a myriad ways in my everyday living. And that to me is also spirituality, because Sukhi talked about bypassing. And there is a lot of navel gazing that gets passed off as spirituality today, you know, and you know, unfortunately, you know, my activist friends don't think too highly of spirituality, and my so-called spiritual friends don't think too highly of activism or responsible living. But I think what's important is to look at, you know, is to really bring the two together, as they're not separate. It's actually just one. It's responsible living, and it's sensitive living. So to me, that seems to be the beginning of the dharmic mind. Whatever, you know, I don't know what it leads on to, but it feels like the first step. I wonder how that lands in you. Yeah.
There's one thing that, it struck me when you were speaking now, Naveen, how easily we put these words together, civilized, modern, all of these, and we don't realize that we're creating a binary in our minds and everywhere. We're getting, So the first thing a dharmic mind does is it does not speak in binaries. Right? It's very careful to see that I'm not promoting binaries. I don't speak in binaries. Though that kind of categorization is the product of these two mindsets. Right? So the sensitivity required to look at this and how your mind is so screwed up is a very important starting point.
Also, we have to look at, are we anything outside of being consumers?
It's 19 hours.
When I looked at my identity, I found that do I even exist outside of my depth of being defined as a consumer? I was just consuming everything. So, um, taking, really stopping, just stop. All of us, if we just stop what we are doing and just take a pause, slow down, stop rushing, stop building, stop growing, and just unwind. It will take a while for us to, even if we stop now, it will take a while for us to finally come to a stop. And I think that is also what we are being called to do now, to not do anything. There is the pandemic happening outside in the world. I'm sitting safe in this room, but it would be very radical. But what if one of the solutions was not to do anything at all? I mean, it is very counterintuitive, but maybe we are doing too much.
Suki, if we don't do all that, Suki, the GDP will go down, my bank balance will be affected.
We've been measuring ourselves too much by productivity,
Of
you
course.
know, and we've been competition, comparison is the way in which which number am I, which, where is India featuring in? So that is how we measure ourselves and our self-esteem. So these are places where we have to just
There are
stop.
some questions coming in from the listeners as well. So could we start taking them?
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going in any particular order, just ones that have caught my attention as we're scrolling down. There's one question from Nilima. So how does the dharmic mind integrate / heal the colonized mind? Would any of you like to respond to that?
There's a very simple idea, difficult to do, which is from the Yoga Sutra. Right? First thing is to wake up to the fact that I am a colonized mind. And then to ask the question, how am I feeding this colonized mind? And how am I feeding all those colonizing paradigms around the place? Right? And then you have to go inside a little more and you start looking at the deep roots that colonization has taken in you, how your entire thinking pattern is influenced by all of this. Right. So in one sense, it's not just, I mean, it's a deep cleansing process where the cleansing has to happen in the emotional patterns, in body patterns, in so many things. Yeah. But it first starts by realizing that we are part of the problem. Right? See, at one level, the solutions are not at all difficult. Yeah. I mean, somebody made a calculation about how much, I forget the where I read this, but about 25 to 30% of the world GDP of almost every nation goes into building weapons of war, directly, indirectly. Trillions have been put into creating nuclear warheads, which are smaller than the size of the various treaties made with Russia. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if Obama had signed the treaty to make these, to sign the order to make these, invest in these kinds of weapons of war around the same time when he got the Nobel Peace Prize. So ending these kinds of obvious investments in war and hatred of each other and all of this is a very obvious thing to do, but how does one get to it? Yeah, if you're fed with nationalism, how do you get to saying, how do all nations prosper? So I guess it'll always be a small group of people who start these processes, and you have to start it with some conviction and look at yourself first. No? How do I, that's exactly what Shuruchi is talking about.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Naveen, I think for me, it would also be, the way we've set up the world is so topsy-turvy, where we reward the wrong things and we're all really just cogs. It's really hard to change a corporate structure or any structure for that matter. So then maybe when one does have agency, like when one does have that power, like when one is setting up your own company, or when it comes to your children, or when it comes to vacation time, maybe then you make that effort to change things, right? To put in a new system, or if you can afford it, to walk out of the system, to say, okay, this is not important, but it's constant work. It's really hard. And another thing which I would say is just to be less exhausted. The system is made that it sucks all your vital force, your pranic energy, just sucks it out. It just leaves you like to do nothing. So that all you can do is stop in front of the TV or order in some food, and that's it. Your weekend is over because you just get that one day off a week. So if enough people get upset or angry about this, and if you do have the power to change it, then you have to be that warrior. You have to take that effort. We have to put in the work for the next few generations. It's something like that in my head, at least.
Beautiful. So what I'm hearing you say, Suruchi, is also one way to cultivate, quote unquote, cultivate the dharmic mind is in a way is to actually invest and conserve our energies wisely
Absolutely.
and consciously,
Absolutely.
rather than just frittering away these energies.
Yeah,
Okay?
and it's hard. I'm saying it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, Shuruchi, can you imagine how hard it is for me to listen to you? Because I was saying those things long back, hoping that a few people would listen.
We have, Raghu, your words have
and
spread.
all of that. Yeah. So today I'm sitting here, a gray beard and all that, saying, hey, we guys screwed up real bad.
No, but
We pushed
it's
it.
working. More and more people are joining that tribe. They are walking
I really
out.
hope so. I really
Okay, on that note, shall we expand this circle as well and bring everybody else on board?
Yeah.
It feels a little odd to see these 4 panels alone. So, Maggie, if
It's
you're
slowly moving, Naveen. We started from 1 person on the screen to now 4. Now we can
okay,
get people.
hopefully that's a metaphor. Maggie, could you unpin everybody and then make it gallery view type of thing, so that we have a circle that's much larger, and we're opening it up also for questions. There have been some, so please put down your question in chat, and then we'll request the person to come up and also just briefly state your question, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah. So Badal, could we request Badal to unmute and in brief? So please keep your questions brief. To briefly come on and share your question, then we'll take it from there. And Maggie is also sharing the panel for Maggie. If you can just put in the chat, instead of sharing the screen, just put in the link on chat. That'll be good. Yeah, so is Badal around?
Yeah, here.
Yes, Badal. Yeah. So, yeah, please go ahead, Badal. And if you could keep it to say 90 seconds to 2 minutes max, the question. Yeah.
So I feel concerned when I observe the younger generation, people who are just out of college or studying, and I feel they're all oriented, a large part of them are oriented to just pleasure and entertainment. Some of them who are highly educated in the corporate world are very materialistic. Very few are introspective, and out of these people who are introspective, a very small percentage is dharmic. And I've been wondering, what is it that one can do to inspire them to be dharmic and have a decolonized mind? Yeah.
Badal, I'll tell you how, Badal. Will you do it from tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yeah. First, really study yoga. Because
Okay.
you have to cleanse your body of all the crap that gets filled in without you realizing.
Mm.
You need to do that. You have to read
Mm.
authors like Frantz Fanon.
Like whom? Sorry.
Frantz Fanon,
Okay.
right? Read people like Tuhi Weiss Smith,
Mm.
Ashish Nandi, Dharampal.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
read about what has happened to cultures in the
Mm.
name of civilization,
Mm.
and feel really sad about this whole reality.
Mm.
Then automatically
Mm.
you will start changing a lot of things,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Mm.
Whatever is your tradition, go
Mm.
back and study your tradition
Mm.
and live in a way that is inspiring to people around you. There is no them, there is no younger generation who's not like this, who's not like that.
Mm.
That's what the word existential responsibility is all about.
Mm.
The only question I can ask is, am I part of the problem or am I part of the solution?
Mm. Yeah.
And if I can seriously ask that question and own up, yeah, to where I'm part of the problem and where I'm part of the solution, then we have a good start.
Right.
Worrying about other people, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, is an escape.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It reminds me of what Raman Maharishi said, that self-realization is the best social service.
Nothing. I'm not saying any of that, Badal. I'm not giving you any of that. All that I'm asking you is to look at yourself honestly and see where your mind is caught with those two mindsets that I said. Where are you acting in ways that are not ecologically ethical, you're not responsible, and so on? That's
Mm.
all.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Badal. We have a question from Sonika. Sonika, if you're here, could you come on screen as well and ask the question yourself? It's a question that I've held for many years, so I'm quite biased towards, bumping this up a little. So go ahead, Sonika.
Lovely. Please feel free to ask it in your words if you feel like.
No, go ahead, go ahead. I have, and it's not a question anymore, so it's yours. Go ahead, please.
Right, right. No, actually, there isn't more to the question. It is what I have just written. I'm wanting
Yeah.
to
No,
hear
what
if
I'm
there
saying
are
is
examples.
people might not have read it.
Yes,
So if you
yes.
could just state it.
So
then
just
it's easier.
wondering if any of you come across examples of communities who are seeking to, or who are reclaiming or living together from this dharmic mind space. And if yes, then if you could share some insights from that. Yeah, that is what I was looking for.
Okay, examples of communities seeking, reclaiming, or living together from the dharmic mind. If yes, could you share your examples and insights from observing them? So there are people with a lot of life experience here. Raghu mentioned some gray beard, and of course Suruchi, Sukhi, and many of you. So are there any examples that you'd like to quote?
No, there are around the world. There are so many small groups that are trying these kind of things out. No? Yeah. You have the example of the circle of friends in America who lived in the center of America and who pursue a very different form of life. They are reviled, they are made to feel ashamed, and yet for years they've been They've been holding on. Yeah. There are pockets of people all over. When I go to villages, there are uncivilized people who live very meaningful lives. Yeah. So there is hope in the sense that there are still pockets of people who have not bought into many of these things. Yeah, the clearest articulation I heard of these two mindsets was actually from a villager in a small clip that had come out. No? Somebody is asking him something. He says in Tamil, he says it very beautifully. He says, why do you think these people came to India? And why didn't we go anywhere? Because he says we were a rich country and we could afford to give to everybody. These are people coming from deserts who have taken from us. And they don't know when to stop. Right. And I think this desert mindset and whatever has crept into a lot of elite Indians too. But there are still lots of people. There are people who are so-called tribals, uncivilized tribals, who live in a very beautiful way, but their lives are being threatened. So the issue is not that there are not groups of people living in this way. The issue is also that when people try to live this way, it's not that easy. So like Suruchi was saying, you have to be willing to take a stand and see what to do and what scaffoldings can be created for us to move out. Yeah. So once when I actually shared with Krishnaji about some of these things, yeah, the question he asked was, how does it help you to become one of the poor? Then the question he asked was, what will you do with the privileges you have? How are you going to use it? Just saying I'm going to give it up and go and live in a village and be part of the poor is not an answer. It's just a reaction. So all of us are gifted with something, na? How am I going to use these gifts? Right? Can I really think about this? Yeah, it's not that all technology is bad. It's not that all money is bad, but you know, I mean, when a doctor is going to use his craft beautifully, you know, a doctor who's not using it in a way that is meant to be used knows what he's doing or she's doing. And there are lots of people who wish to move to this side and not, you know, for whatever reasons they feel forced or this or that. So we have to continuously create these contexts. There are quite a few examples, yeah.
And it's
And
not
I'm sure there are
necessarily
examples
that,
in everybody's
Yeah.
family. And
Yeah.
right. And those people who opted out will be the ones who are not held up as heroes in those families.
yeah.
Right. So how does this change? So it's
There
not
also-
that rare. And, you know, I'm hoping that COVID has pushed this thinking more. I don't know.
in the COVID scene, also,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who are coming together as a community, even in a virtual way, to do deep work, to do deep reclaiming of selves and take greater responsibility. So they may not be physically living together, but there are lots of communities of people who are coming together and as a collective to live dharmic lives. So I think it's like a conflagration right now. The amount of work that is happening and communities that are forming, and because of pandemic, these online people are getting online and people are able to meet each other in a much easier way. Don't have to physically travel. So I think
I'd also say that, sorry.
Go ahead, Sunji.
I would also say that even this is like a tiny example. This is an example of a tiny community that has just come up, and we're exploring it. So this is also a dharmic community, and for people who can't move out of the city, or though there are people, they're very brave souls who have done that and are doing it. But suppose you have a group of friends or relatives, and you decide to stick it out with them. You work through the fights, you work through the disagreements, and you take time to call them, to be in touch. To me, that would also be very dharmic. Because we don't stay in touch. We're like, she'll understand because I'm just so exhausted. I'm so exhausted, and then we don't stay in touch. So that would also be a dharmic community where you make the effort to be in touch. You put your ego aside and you work through the problems and the fights.
Okay, Chitranjan has a question as well.
You'll
Chitranjan,
also
could
have an
you,
answer, man.
pardon?
What's the question?
Chitranjan, could you come on screen and also,
Yeah, so I have been listening to this conversation. It's fascinating, and the thought that I have had is that we seem to be coming to this idea of a dharmic community, or a dharmic way of living, or a dharmic way of thinking, or a dharmic way of being, in a fairly settled way. I think, living in a village is more dharmic than living in a city. Living with more consumption is less dharmic than living with less consumption, etc., 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 etc. I must admit to being a little queasy about that. To me, it seems that dharma is pretty subtle, and to put it down into a set of prescriptions about what would make for more dharmic ways of living than otherwise, question mark for me. I think personally struggled with it quite a lot and continuing to do so. And one thing that I have at least come to is, if I can say it, that this is it, it is probably not it.
Because there are three other possible truths, no?
Sorry?
The moment you've said that this is it, there are at least three other possible truths.
Exactly. So I'm just wondering whether, the way we have formulated it here today, is that a way of that spiritual bypass that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, no, if it has come through like that, too bad. There are two responses I have for this. One is, the only idea of dharma is what I said before. Na? What in your idea is a simultaneity of self and everybody else. That to me is a beautiful base statement. Yeah. The Buddha statement is another beautiful base statement for me. Right? But at the same time, I think too much of relativism about this is also boring me.
Yeah, I agree.
And I would like to categorically state that certain kinds of things, I think, are not dharmic. Yeah, so that's my opinion, and I'm going to state it.
Sure.
Then let's discuss it. Let's dialogue it and see. Yeah, and through that dialogue, maybe we learn something, no?
Yeah.
But this relativism is not leading anywhere.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, and I don't think I'm talking about relativism. I'm talking more about, like I said, neti, which is definitely not relativism. And and another one actually that, like you said, Raghu, about the kind of things that seem to point the way in some sense. The other thing that I find extremely useful is dharmeva hato hanti, dharma rakshati rakshata.
Sure.
I mean, whenever I have a question about is something tending in this direction or not, I'll go back to that and say, does it look like it, at least to my conditioned mind at this time in this way? Does that work? And I acknowledge that my mind is conditioned, and therefore it will It will screw up the interpretations of that question. But at least I'm looking at it from that perspective. Dharma rakshati rakshataha.
Yeah, sure. And you're willing to pay the price for it and look at it again and say, hey, did I goof? But at that point of time,
That's how it looks at that time.
and say,
Yeah.
this is what I think is dharmic. I'm going to act on it
Yeah.
and be open to being questioned and
Yeah, very much.
told that you screwed up and own up that I screwed up and learn.
Absolutely.
That's what the cybernetic working through is all about. No? You start from I don't know, you do something, learn, do something, learn, do something, learn.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's a widening spiral and not a
All slowly embracing more and more of your being and so on. Yeah, very much. Thank you.
True, and
We
it's
have-
a-
Yeah, go
not-
ahead, Suruchi. Sorry. Suki.
not causing harm. To live a life where you're not causing harm to yourself and to others. Also, very simply put. Yeah, that is also, and it's an evolutionary journey. So if what I'm saying today is what I feel today, but I'm very much on an evolutionary journey, and I'll be very happy to say tomorrow, oh, what I thought yesterday was absolutely rubbish. Today I have a better view of it because my journey is towards also spaciousness, creating more space. More I delete and remove the rubbish inside of me, and more I regulate my nervous system and release my traumas, suddenly intelligence increases. And it is one of the most amazing things I've found on this journey is that from dumbness that I was talking about to becoming more intelligent, I can see more, hear more, receive more, know more when the veils and the fog is disappearing. So it's very much what is now, but I'm also very anticipatory about what will come tomorrow. So nothing fixed in stone.
So if I hear, and if I understand this right also, the intention is not to crystallize it in any one way, but to invite us on an inquiry of learning and self-reflectivity. Yeah.
no, based on some principles. Nothing. See, I think the difference is, when you get, I mean, I might sound a little technical here, but there's a difference between grammar and structure, and I'm finding people getting confused with this all the time. There is a grammar of living which can be dharmic, which does not have to do with, do you have wealth, do you not have wealth, this, that, and the other. It's a very, very different level of a question. Right? So there are some basic principles on which you can anchor yourself and ask, what are you doing with what you have?
So it's like a skeleton in a sense.
It can't be left open.
Open. Okay. Okay, it's 2 minutes away from time. So do you want to just make some quick closing statements then to wrap up, or if it's too short a time, then we will just drop it at this, or
Maybe Kranti had a question, something impacted, not impacted.
well, it wasn't clear if it was a comment or a Kranti, you want to?
Can I? Yeah, I
go
just
ahead,
want
please.
to put my voice here because I'm living in US, and just a month ago, there is a death happened in the community of a young guy who is 39 years old. And that day evening, we had a small gathering with our friends. The news came up in the morning, and when I put in that friends group that something has happened, we know that friend, not too closely, but we know her personally. I asked them, like, should we cancel this gathering because I don't feel comfortable? They said that happened somewhere. No, we are not impacted.
30.
I really couldn't digest that feeling of not being impacted. Like, And I'm still getting to understand what is this impact and not impacted, because it did impact me. And still I had to go ahead because of that socializing norm which sits on the head, that this is the group I have and I had to go. And then still I was not comfortable. I literally crushed out, like, what is that I'm really doing? Something is going wrong in just a neighborhood, and two kids and a single woman in US, and a 10 group of women married with kids don't seem impacted. And then that tug of war is still there. So I don't know what is the question. I don't know what is the answer.
No, your question is very, very
It's
clear,
very,
Kranti.
yeah.
How do you stay with your conviction that in your what is happening to you? This is exactly the question. No?
Who have we become?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
on television they will show you scenes of people dying or this or that. The next scene will be an advertising thing that says, why don't you have chocolates and be happy?
True.
Right? So there are lots of ways in which this thing of being humanly connected and compassionate is not looked at very favorably. And I think these are issues. Yeah, if civilization is going to make us less and less and less compassionate, what kind of civilization is this? What are we talking about that's civilized? We have to question it. And when you question it, there are these pressures. Yeah, that's a reality. So come, we will listen to you and help you feel you're impacted. Because just listening to you, I'm impacted. So we're on the same boat.
Yeah. Being impacted is a lot of responsibility. You have to become responsible then. So better not to feel.
Yeah, but actually, Kranti, what you've asked is a very important thing. But we can't go into this. Not being impacted is a body armor which you learn as you get more and more civilized.
Yeah.
And people who don't get impacted impact other people without thinking about what that impact means, and so on. So it's a very fundamental question you're asking. It is a question which is central to colonization.
So to feel impact is actually a gift, it feels like.
Yeah, it's 9:30 and I have another call.
So we'll wrap this up here.
I have to zoom away.
Yeah, we'll meet again next year. Yeah?
No, yeah, this is again got me into one of these things. No, we got to really look at this question that we've started off.
Yes, so
Anyway,
we'll
whoever joins
continue these
us
conversations soon.
Yeah.
I'll send out a mail to everybody with, how we're going to build on this in the next few weeks. I mean, the mail will come to you very soon, but we'll keep continuing these conversations. We won't have to wait another year for this. Yeah,
Yeah,
and hopefully we can slowly build on this.
Yeah, you'll have to build on it.
Yeah. So big thanks again to everybody who made it, and the three of you and the TRW friends. Yeah?
And to you, Naveen.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks to all of us.
All of
Yes.
All of us.
May we stay open and able to be impacted.
Yeah, all of us who have discovered that we know the enemy and the enemy is us.
Thank you. Thank you. See you all very soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.